Thank you for your presence this evening. This is probably a hard one for me tonight, but I'm going to do the best I can with this. The topic, as you see, is 6 things children want and need from parents. And I base this on an article that I read several years ago, what teenagers are dying to tell their parents. And I think we all struggle with the decision making and the rules that we try to enforce and how we take that job seriously. And what we want is sometimes doesn't match totally up with what actually happens. And yet the desire for happy homes is, of course, at the heart of every Christian. We want homes that are full of love and full of peace. And we want homes with a vision of helping each other go to heaven. Sometimes it may not seem like it, but homes are basically, in churches, basically as a general rule, the best quality homes in society. But we're striving for the standard, and we're trying to set the standard. The world doesn't know the standard, doesn't appreciate the standard, and therefore many of those homes are headed for disaster, if not already there. And we don't want that for granted. We don't want to take for granted that parenting in the Lord's church among God's people is probably the single toughest job. And I'm hoping that everyone here is in agreement with that it is tough. But you're also in agreement with this principle that it must be guided by the principles of God, His Word. And making that happen, wanting that to happen, and making it happen sometimes is very, very difficult. Juveniles can tell us something about mistakes. Most parents can look back and say, yeah, I can tweak that. I would have done this differently. Or look back at some of the things you did right and say, maybe I could have done that even better. Parents are usually the most critical of themselves. At least that's the way it should be. Just as being a Christian, the number one critic of the self, when my number one critic is me, your number one critic should be you as well. Some of the things that we want to do, we criticize ourselves and say, could I have done that better? And we look at that and try to be as honest before God, because God knows the truth, and we're trying to be honest before God. And so what we're trying to do is trying to reach out for every bit of wisdom that we can find and that we can muster and that we can develop, so that we do the absolute best job of trying to train our children in the way that they should go. And as we're doing that, we're trying to grab hold of every principle of wisdom that's found in the Word of God. In the reading just a moment ago, in Ephesians chapter 6, children, obey your parents. He's writing to homes that were Christian homes, that were based upon the principle of Jesus being head over all things to the church. Within that church at Ephesus were different family units. different children who were still in subjection to their parents. And he says, children, you take that responsibility and you take it seriously, because obeying your parents in the Lord is the right thing to do. It's just right. And you make it easier on them. In turn, if you make it easier on them, they will make it easier on you. So obey your parents in the Lord, for that's right. There is no failure when both the parents and the children are interested in doing what is right. And what is right is respectful. Respect is right. And respecting the parents is the right thing to do. On the other hand, the parental role is very hard. It demands respect. It should obtain it from the children if it is done respectfully. So when we're dealing with the issues that involve us in whatever role we're in, whether we're the children, and we have to respect that role of the parent who struggles with how to do it the best way, and the child who understands that it is important to honor. Listen to the next phrase. It's not only right, but honor your father and mother. That was found in Exodus 20. In those that are noted as the 10 Commandments, you go down the list of those commandments, and this is the one that had a promise attached to it. That if you'll behave this way, that if you'll honor your parents, your father and mother, here's a general rule. Here's a general thing that is characteristic of that home where parents are treated respectfully and honored for their position and for their role of authority in that home unit. The promise is that it may be well with you. It works better that way. I'd rather things work well. And that's what children should desire, is that we want this thing to work well. It's supposed to work well. It may be well with you if you honor them. It may not be so well if you do not. But it will be well with you, and you may live long on the earth. It's a general rule. For example, those children who honor their parents don't get involved in drinking and drugs. Do not run around with crowds of people who care nothing about your well-being, to say nothing of your eternal well-being. So don't run with crowds of people that may jeopardize the very life that you will have here in the flesh. Now, taking that then, he takes us to the second aspect of this relationship, verse 4. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Fathers, take that seriously. Take it seriously because you love your children. Now, taking that seriously means then that I'm going to reflect how good a job I'm doing, how I need to tweak what I'm doing, how I need to improve what I am doing. And so I'm looking at this article of teenagers and what they are dying to tell their parents. And this is condensed from a speech by Merle Garner. And he says in this article, during the next 24 hours, some disturbing things will happen to America's youth. 1,260 kids in grades 10 to 12 will quit school. 2,740 girls between the ages of 15 and 19 will become pregnant. More than 1,000 will have abortions. Problems with drugs and violence in our high schools will erupt. Numbers like these have become quite literally a national crime. In fact, people under 18 years of age constitute 28% of all arrests made for serious crimes committed in America. I've talked to hundreds of parents who are angry and sad that their sons and daughters have wound up in trouble. Where did we go wrong, they ask. Many times the kids themselves provide the answer. Mom and Dad didn't listen to me. I see these kids on their way to the detention home or juvenile home. As I listen to their stories, I ask this question. If your parents were seated with us right now, what would you like to tell them? Their answers are strikingly consistent with those that young lawbreakers at the Gulf Correctional Center in Gulf, Ontario, gave when they were questioned by the preacher Charles Galea, on whose, quote, code for parents this article is partly based. Here's what the kids had to say. If you want to listen to those children who wound up in the wrong direction, listen carefully to these 6 things as told by those children. First on the list, I'm just going to leave them all up there. We're going to go one at a time. Don't lose your temper in a crunch. There are frustrations, but be in control of your temper at all times. Don't lose your temper in a crunch. That's the number one rule that children would say back to their parents is, I can respect your frustration, just manage it better. Keep cool. Controlled responses, tempered with reassuring love, works better than just flying off the handle, uncontrolled rage. That works much better. When we can't control our responses, how can we expect our children to control theirs? We can't be trusted with our feelings, and we're sending a message to them, teaching them that therefore you can expect me to control my feelings. And sometimes uncontrolled anger and frustration, losing the temper, also causes them to think that you reject me as a human being. You reject me. And that may have something to do with the statement that we read just a moment ago in Ephesians 6 about fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. And sometimes we can do that by uncontrolled responses. Temper everything that you do and everything that you say with assurances. I remember, and it didn't mean that much to me at the time, but it did later. When my parents would say, this is going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you. And I thought they were crazy. But what their meaning is, I love you so much that this really hurts me to have to do this. And I got several needed whippings. And it didn't kill me, as the Proverbs says. It won't kill them. And sometimes it will break the will to keep doing the same thing. And so sometimes it needs to be there, but with the assurance. And not just at the moment. It would have been much better, I would think, to not only follow through with the discipline that I was to expect, but also follow it through with assurances that I love you in spite of that. And that's why it hurts me so much. Parents hurt because they love their children. And they don't like to have to discipline their children. But nevertheless, when you discipline, make sure that you do not lose your temper in a crunch. In another passage in Colossians 3, verse 21, Paul writes, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." And provoking to wrath seems to me to have two possibilities. Number one, you can provoke them toward the wrath of hell, the wrath of God, by not disciplining your own self in regard to your love for your children. Controlled anger is talked about in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28 or verse 26. When he says, be angry, and there are times when that's a legitimate feeling and that's a legitimate response, is to be angry. And it's not a sin to be angry. But pushing that anger beyond controlled boundaries is what is forbidden, because he says, be angry and do not sin. Meaning that anger itself may not be, but it can become sinful. And do not let the sun go down on your wrath, meaning that you're going to be over it pretty soon. Why? Because you're always critical of your own responses. You're always critical of yourself. And as you're trying your best to be the best parent that you can possibly be, that's one of the things that you're always examining, is whether I did that the best way possible. Controlled anger means I'm in control of that anger. I'm not going to unleash it in a way that is abusive. I'm going to use it in a controlled manner, measured response, and I measure out how much I'm going to give in this situation. So children would say, don't lose your temper. Second one, set definite boundaries and don't keep moving them. Set definite boundaries that are fixed, that they know how far they can go and how far they cannot venture. And be firm in setting the penalties if you pass this boundary. You know the boundary, and you know what kind of response you're going to get if you pass that boundary. These are boundaries of rules and regulations. They say that you cannot do this, but you can understand what the penalty will be if you venture past that. Children do not appreciate parents who keep moving the boundaries, so that they are frustrating with knowing what the rules really are and why you've made the rules. Let us make sure that when we are incorporating the laws of God, that we understand that we've got to get it across to our children that I'm doing this because I respect God's law over me. And God has rules for me. And I'm His child. And I have to be careful about my venturing past God's rules. And He's told me to have the headship over this family. And so I must try to implement the rules of God and respect them. And I've also got to try to get you to understand that these rules are not arbitrary, and therefore the boundaries that I set are not arbitrary, and they will not move. And if you violate those rules, you understand the consequences. So that it is all on you if you violate the rules. Children need the security of knowing what the rules are and that they're not always being moved around. Set definite boundaries. Children need guidelines with authority behind them. They want to know who's the boss, who is the head. Don't set them up to disrespect authority. If they cannot respect the authority that is set in motion by the family, then they won't respect the authority that is set in place at the school level. They will not respect the authority at the state and local level. They will not respect God's authority. So set definite boundaries. Explain why you're setting those. I'm turning to the book of Proverbs because it is full of wisdom. And that's the design of it, is to set forth wisdom. Well, look at this statement in Proverbs 19. Proverbs 19, verse 8. Let's see. Yeah, Proverbs. Let me get in Proverbs. I'm in Psalms. All right. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Chasten your son while there is hope. While you've got that measure of control in place, chasten them. Set the boundaries and chasten them when they violate those rules. And do not set your heart on his destruction. How do you do that? Set his heart on destruction by not chastening your son. Then you're saying, I don't care if you're lost forever. That says, I don't care about you. And the child sees that. And he's at least wise enough to know that he is not being cared for and respected as a human being, much less as a child that should be loved by his parents. In Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. This is the way you should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's a general rule. But it's a rule that says if you plant it there, they've got some boundaries and they operate from their free will within those boundaries even later on. Make sure they know love is behind the chastening. Hebrews chapter 12 says, what parent is there who does not chasten their son or daughter? And he points out that chastening is because you do love them. I mean, there's so many weak-willed parents that do not chasten their children because they confuse I love them too much with the fact is that if you do not chasten them, you don't love them at all. And you're setting your mind on their destruction because children cannot rule themselves without somebody setting the standard before them and the example of self-control before them. And that's you, parents. That's us. Thirdly, one of the things that I heard quite frequently and I use quite frequently, remember who you are. Tell your children to remember who they are. But realize also that they have the right to say, remember who you are. You are who? You are, I'm a child of God. I'm not a perfect child of God, but I'm a child of God. And I try to remember that's who I am. Every one of us must remember who we are, whether you're in the child position or in the parent position. Remember who you are. If you're 40, I think a child is saying, if you're 40, don't act like you're 16. Be parents. Remember who you are. You're a parent. You're not a peer. So many parents these days want to be a buddy, want to be a pal, an equal, with the same, and with no more authority than the other. Therefore, they don't remember who they are. You can't have just fun with your kids all the time. In other words, yes, we should enjoy things with our children, but you still must retain the parental role. You must step up to the plate of being the parent, not the pal. So many children go astray, and I've seen them through the years go astray because the parents set no rules. They were trying too hard to be a pal than a parent. Remember who you are. You're that child's parent. And God is holding you responsible to be a parent in that role. A parent can have fun with their children, but a parent needs to know also that I can't just have fun. I must also be the disciplinarian of this family. Talk about God often. Children need to hear that. The groundwork for everything in their life should be based upon the foundation that you are setting in motion in your own life, and therefore see the importance of it in their lives. The whole book of Proverbs is written to try to guide a young man. Give him a way of looking at things from two different angles. And that's how wisdom is developed, is because you have the ability to see things from different perspectives. And that's the reason for the book of Proverbs. But he says you're not even going to get anywhere with a child unless it starts with this foundation. Look at Proverbs 1 verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In other words, everything is based upon the premise that I believe in God, and I believe God has the final say, and God has revealed His will, and I respect God, and I fear God, and I act according to the fear of the Lord, because that's where I gain the perspective of what should and should not be done in this family unit. Then I'm turning to Deuteronomy, where Moses is talking about the rules that should go on and how the family structure should be built around this great respect for God. In Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Here's the first rule. Love Him with all of your heart. Love Him with all of your soul and with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. Parents, this rule has to be in your heart, so that you're measuring everything else you do and decide on the basis of that great respect and love for God. Then you take it inside yourself, and then you teach them diligently to your children. They can miss out on a lot of things, but they don't need to miss out on this. Teach them diligently to your children and talk about them. Don't let it just be a church thing, because after a while they will learn that that's just a church thing. That's just what they do. They talk church when they get to church or on the way to church, and that's about it. And we never hear about God again until the next day and the next service or the next Sunday. And that doesn't get it. Children see through that you do not love the Lord your God with all of your heart. You don't talk about it anymore. And they see through that. They want you to commit to that principle. Talk about God. Talk about God often, because that disciplines yourself. And then that also creates discipline and direction that the children can respect. These words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way. One of the great things that you can do is point out, look at God's great creation today. Everything that God sure did put a great, beautiful moon up there today or tonight. The sunshine, the rain are great blessings from God. Remind them these things come from God. Don't let them take it for granted that it was just here by accident. No, it's not here by accident. It's here by the will and the power and the goodness of God. Teach them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. That is the first thing you think of. Your frontlet is something that's right in front of you. And it holds God's Word in front of you. And what he's saying is, guide your thoughts and guide your life by this, because you do love the Lord your God. And you talk about Him because you love Him. Children are looking for that. They need that. And next, call our bluff. Children want you to call their bluff because they don't mean everything they say. Don't be intimidated by their threats. I remember a few times when I threatened to leave home. Didn't have any clue how I was going to eat the next day. Maybe I could survive the night. And I was thinking maybe out in the woods, but I better take me some matches. I better take this, I better take that. But I knew that was not going to get me through the rest of my life. And it might have been good for me if my parents says, well, let's pack up some things now. You need something. If you're going to be out there by yourself and you need a stick, you're going to need something to guard yourself, and you're going to need some food. Now let's pack your bag. And don't let them threaten you and you be intimidated by their threat. Call their bluff. But understand that if they follow through with it, you're still going to be watching very, very closely. Don't be intimidated. They really don't mean everything they say, but don't push them over the edge. And finally, be honest. Be honest with us. I think children can respect honesty as well as anybody. There are times to say, I messed up, and I'm sorry. I remember a time when my approach was this. Instead of taking the belt and using it on my son, I handed him the belt. And I said, I've done a terrible job at parenting, apparently, and I want you to give me a good whipping. Of course, he didn't. But the point is that if you can be honest, they can respect that. If you can say, I was wrong, I messed up, will you forgive me? Children can respect that and easily forgive. Can we start again? Those are words that we need to be able to say. And we need to say them because we mean them. We mean to teach honesty by example. We want them to be honest, but they need to see an example of it. And sometimes the example is that when we mess up, we just need to say to our son or daughter, I sure messed up then, and I'm sorry. If I have disappointed you and made you angry, would you tell me everything? I'll just listen and then say, I sure am sorry about that. Can we start all over? You see, you balance everything that you expect in your child with the same kind of example that you want to present to the child, because they will learn more by example than by mere words. And if the words that we speak are not matched with the example we set, then that causes them to think, my parents are not honest. And that creates frustration. So be honest. Many children could be spared a lot of misery and a lot of pain if they had parents that loved them and that were honest with them, were not afraid to discipline them when it's needed. And that's really what we talked about in essence this morning. We talked about building your house focused on letting Christ become everything to you. And what we're trying to do is get our children to heaven because we love them. And we want them to, in turn, honor us enough to try to help us get to heaven. I remember a lesson that I preached first and second child when they were born. It was lessons my child will teach me. Among those things, they will teach me things like humility and trust. They'll teach me to trust my father. They will teach me to be honest before my father. They'll also teach me how to love genuinely and deeply. Build your house with love and with wisdom. And I know you want to do that, and I know we all want to do that. But let's do it with the added incentive of saying Christ is going to be everything to me so that I can become better at being who I need to be as a child of God, and then passing that on to my family and to my home. Build your house with love as your high principle, with wisdom as to how to set the right standard and set the right example and set the right rules. And then use those standards and wisdom and love to direct the discipline that you will need to use in that family unit from time to time, because you do love your children and you do want them to go to heaven. It's not been a lesson to tell one what to do to become a Christian, but it is a lesson on what we are to do to stay and develop as a Christian. Let's develop our homes. Let's develop our spirituality within our homes. Let it be reflected in our personal lives, and then share it to the best of your ability to your children, and tell them often about your love for them, because they are mighty, mighty important to you. If you've never obeyed the gospel and want to this evening, we can help you with that. Or if you've fallen and need to correct things in a public way and we can help you with that, please come and let your wishes be made known as we stand together and sing this song.